Now, when Titleist release a new series of irons, the golf industry takes note, and rightly so, because they have been the #1 iron played on the PGA Tour for the past 11 years. Well, in today's video, we're going to look at their new release of the T100, T150, T250 and T350 irons. I'm going to break these down into two categories, starting with the T100 and T150. Now, I'm here at the Titleist Performance Centre at Woburn Golf Club, and I've been testing out the new release of irons. Now, Titleist focusing very much on the 3Ds, and those are distance control, dispersion control, and descent angle. Now, when it comes to the T100 and T150, even though on the shelf they're going to look very similar, there are some subtle differences that allow us to dive in to those 3Ds. Now, when it comes to the T100, Titleist focusing very much as this club being their modern tour iron, and focuses very much on precision and control. Whereas the T150, or as Titleist like to refer to it as the faster players iron, is all packed with the same technology for that precision and control that we're seeing at the T100. However, for those players looking for a little bit of a faster ball speed, this one might work nicely for you. And from a visual point of view, when I set these clubs up down by the ball, Titleist telling me that I'm getting an extra 1mm of blade length out of the T150 over the T100. But when I set it up down by the ball, I'm not really seeing a great deal of difference, which I actually think is going to work really quite nicely for those players looking to combo set. Now, for the first time ever, Titleist have created a progressive groove that runs right the way through this whole series of irons. And the idea of this is to give us the ultimate control in all weather conditions out on the golf course, having a slightly different groove structure in the 8-iron down to, let's say, the wedge, compared to what we're seeing out of the 7-iron up to the long irons. And ultimately what we're looking for is that distance control. So another similarity we're getting from the T100 and T150 is variable face thickness. This is getting consistency across the face of the club with those off-centered strikes. Now, we've heard about this before. However, what we're seeing with these particular irons is a slightly thinner part of the club on the outer side of that center spot, allowing us to get those ball speeds still going out there with those off-centered strikes. And that's what we're getting from a feedback point of view from tour players. They want the look of a bladed iron, but they want the forgiveness with that variable face thickness. Now, the key difference between the T100 and T150 is 1 degree in loft, with the T150 coming out a degree stronger, enabling players to get that ball out there just a little bit faster. However, when we move into the longer irons of the T150, we're having that center of gravity push a little bit further down in the club, which is going to enable us to launch that ball just a little bit higher. So it allows us to be able to blend that T150 longer iron into the T100s seamlessly. Now, plenty of tech gone into both of these irons for this new release. However, from a feel point of view, these clubs are forged in their construction, which is giving me that kind of soft, buttery feel that you would expect from a tour-inspired iron. Then we move on to the T250 and T350 irons, and my first impression is, wow, they do not look like game improvement irons. When you stick them on the shelf, you're going to want to pick them up and feel like you're picking up a bladed club. However, these are packed with technology that's going to help your game. Now, when I set this T250 iron up behind the ball, it looks just like what I've just seen in the T100 and T150, which tells me that this is going to be working perfectly again for those combo sets. But like I said, this one is packed with technology and is moving on from that T200 iron that we've seen in the past. Now, we've lost that back plate that you will have seen in the old T200 range in previous generations, and we've gone for this new singular design, which I've got to say does look pretty impressive. So even though the T250 and T350 are classed as, let's say, game improvement irons, they very much don't look like that when I set up behind the ball. Now, Titleist focusing again on their 3Ds, looking for that control and that descent angle, and this is where they've created this patented tungsten weighting that goes on the perimeters of this club, moving it from in the toe and in the heel to give us that maximum stability throughout the ball, again giving us that dispersion control with every shot. Now visually, when I set these clubs up behind the ball, they do look slightly different in their profile compared to, let's say, what we're seeing at the T100 and T150. The T350 being a little bit bigger in its profile, which I think is going to work really well for lots of you players out there that are looking for confidence during your setup position. However, the T250, this one looks very similar to what I'm getting out of that T150 and T100, so it's going to work really nicely for you players that are maybe coming out of those players' irons and want a little bit more help, or for a player that looks to get a little bit more consistency in their game as they get lower with their handicap. Now both of these irons come with a new forged L face, and this is all about consistency with all your strikes across the face, just like we saw out of the T100 and T150. However, even though we're getting that forgiveness from heel to toe with these particular irons, also with a lower strike, it's going to help us get that ball up in the air, which ultimately this is what these clubs are designed to help with. So inside these two heads, we've got max impact technology, which is going to give us that spin control, distance control from any lie. Now you got to think of this as kind of like a trampoline. When you go in the middle of that trampoline, you're going to get a nice spring out of the middle of it. However, when you move to the outer side of the trampoline, you're going to start to lose that spring. However, with this technology, we're able to maintain that spring all the way across the club face. Now, as a player like me, I would focus, let's say, on the T100 irons coming into my golf bag, and I'll be reluctant to, let's say, look at game improvement irons to go in, let's say, the top end of my bag. However, what I'm impressed about most is just this new refined look, and I would certainly consider putting either the T250 or the T350 into my bag if it's going to work for my game. Now, I think it's really clear to see why Titleist have been the #1 iron used on the PGA Tour. Titleist don't release irons until they're 100% ready to go to market. And we can see the improvements that they've brought to the table for this generation, allowing us to be able to combo a set really quite nicely, whichever setup is going to work best for your game. And that's what's so important, is for go and get yourself a fitting with your foremost professional and see which of these irons is going to work best for your game this season.